3 weeks ago, my Tuesday started like any other me. Marcus Thornfield, a freelance architect. Hunched over blueprints in my kitchen, still wearing yesterday's faded tee. My wife, Deanna, the county's new police chief, had left early for a meeting with the mayor. Then came the doorbell, a sharp, insistent ring that screamed trouble. Through the peephole, I saw Marlene Blackwood, our HOA president, better known as Karen. She stood there like a general, clad in a pristine blazer, her face set in that smug "I'm about to ruin your day" expression. Behind her was a locksmith, toolbox in hand, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Thornfield," Karen declared, clutching a thick folder, "I'm here on official HOA business. Your property violates multiple regulations, structural changes, improper storage, zoning issues. Section 48C grants me emergency inspection rights. I'd studied our HOA bylaws while designing homes for neighbors. Section 48C didn't exist." "What violations?" I asked, keeping the chain lock on. "Our house passes every inspection." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Your wife's been dodging my calls, ignoring HOA mandates. I demand entry to ensure compliance." The locksmith shifted, muttering, "I need homeowner consent or a court order." Karen snapped, "I'm the elected HOA president. Will do as I say, or I'll have the police handle this." I stayed calm. "Mrs. Blackwood, call the police if you believe there's a crime, but you're not entering without legal authority." That's when she unraveled, screaming, "You newcomers think you're above our rules?" Her phone was out, dialing 911, ranting about threats I never made. The locksmith bolted, apologizing as he fled. Karen kept calling 7 times in an hour, each call more unhinged. Little did she know, she'd knocked on the wrong door. Deanna wasn't just my wife, she was the new police chief. And this small incident was about to unravel a massive conspiracy involving fake property lines. Millions in fraud in 17 neighborhoods. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser arrived. Karen paced my lawn, spinning a tale of victimhood to Officers Daniels and Lee, both young and unsure. "Officers, thank heavens," she cried, conjuring tears. "This man threatened me while I performed my legal duties as HOA president. His wife's obstructing community standards." I stepped outside. "Officers, I'm Marcus Thornfield." Mrs. Blackwood demanded entry with a locksmith, citing fake violations. I asked for a proper meeting and she lost it. Before Karen could escalate, Eleanor Finch, her 72-year-old neighbor and retired architect, marched over, phone in hand. "I recorded everything," she said. "Karen's been harassing families for months with these tactics. Same story with the Wilsons on Elm Street." Karen's face flushed crimson. "Mrs. Finch, you're meddling in official business." But Eleanor was unshaken. "I've seen your game, Marlene. You bully families with fake rules until they break." Her video showed Karen's full meltdown, demanding illegal entry, threatening me, all of it. Officer Lee reviewed the footage, eyebrows raised. Then Deanna's car pulled up. In her chief's uniform, badge gleaming, she stepped out, and Karen froze. "Mrs. Blackwood," Deanna said coolly, "explain what authority lets you try breaking into my home." Karen stammered about community standards, then pivoted. "This is a conflict of interest. I demand outside officers." She whipped out. Her phone, live streaming, police corruption. She shrieked. "The chief's protecting her criminal husband," Eleanor countered, addressing the officers. "Karen's driven out 6 families in 2 years, Wilson's, Garcia's, the elderly Thompsons all bullied into selling." The officers, now skeptical, thanked us and left, but Karen's live stream exploded online, titled "Police Chief Shields Criminal Husband." It spread through community groups edited to paint her as the victim. Comments poured in. "Corrupt cops ruin America. Follow the money." But neighbors fought back. "Karen tried this with my fence last year," one posted. "She's a bully," another wrote. Eleanor uploaded her unedited video, dismantling Karen's lies with facts and timestamps. The tide was turning. Karen doubled down, calling an emergency safety meeting at the community center. Flyers screamed, "Stop police corruption!" The room buzzed with her supporters, mostly older residents who'd bought into her fear-mongering. About property values and community standards, she stood at the front like a general addressing troops, her voice carrying that same righteous indignation I'd witnessed at my front door. We cannot allow our neighborhood to become a haven for corruption and lawlessness, she declared to enthusiastic applause. When the very people we trust to protect us start protecting criminals instead, we have to take action. But Eleanor had done her homework. She'd spent the week since our confrontation talking to every family, documenting Karen's pattern of harassment and abuse. When it came time for community input, Eleanor stood up with a thick folder of her own. I'd like to share some information about Mrs. Blackwood's actual track record as HOA president, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the room. The Johnsons on Maple Street, forced to sell after Karen claimed their garden, violated imaginary regulations. The Martinez family harassed for months over the color of their front door until they moved out of state. Each example was documented with photos, emails, and witness statements. The room's energy shifted as she spoke, the applause for Karen's rhetoric gradually replaced by uncomfortable murmurs. The Henderson family, both in their 80s, forced to spend their retirement savings on legal fees defending against frivolous HOA violations that mysteriously disappeared once they agreed to sell their home below market value. Karen tried to regain control, but her supporters were wavering when Tom Rodriguez from Oak Street stood up and confirmed that Karen had tried similar tactics with his family. Even her most loyal followers started looking uncomfortable. Came to our house with the same locksmith, same fake paperwork, same threats, Tom testified. The only reason we didn't get forced out is because my brother-in-law is a lawyer and called her bluff. The tide was turning, but Karen had one more card to play? This is exactly what I'm talking about, she shouted over the growing dissent. They've turned you against me, manipulated you into supporting corruption. Well, I have information that none of you know about. I have evidence of illegal activities, financial improprieties, and abuse of power that goes far beyond what you've seen. Her voice took on a dangerous edge. And if this community won't stand up for what's right, I'll take this to people who will. As the meeting dissolved into chaos with neighbors arguing and Karen storming out while promising to expose the truth, I noticed something that chilled me. Eleanor grabbed my arm as we left the community center. Marcus, we need to talk privately, she said quietly. There's something about Karen that you and Diana need to know. Something I discovered when I was researching property records for tonight's presentation. Her expression was grim. I think we've stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than neighborhood harassment. The drive home was silent, but my mind was racing. Karen's threat about taking this to people who will act echoed in my head, combined with Eleanor's ominous warning about property records. I was starting to realize that our small neighborhood dispute might be just the tip of a very large and very dangerous iceberg. Eleanor invited Diana and me over for coffee the next morning, but this wasn't a social call. Her dining room table was covered with maps, legal documents, and printouts that looked like they belonged in a detective's evidence room. I've been investigating property records since our confrontation, Eleanor began, her usually warm demeanor replaced by grim determination. What I found explains everything about Karen's behavior, and it's worse than harassment-type systematic fraud. She spread out a large map of our neighborhood overlaid with transparency sheets showing different periods. Oakwood Heights, as it was originally platted in 1995, Eleanor explained, pointing to the base map. I helped design 6 of these homes, so I know the original property lines by heart. She placed the first transparency over the base map. This is how the property boundaries appeared in HOA records from 2015. Then came another sheet. And this is what the records show today. The difference was staggering property lines had shifted, lot sizes had changed, and entire sections of what should have been common area had somehow become private property. Every single modification benefits Karen or her associates, Eleanor continued. Look at this. She pointed to Karen's property, which had mysteriously expanded by nearly half an acre over the past decade, absorbing what used to be community green space. Diana leaned forward, her police chief training kicking in. Eleanor, do you have documentation showing when these changes were made and who authorized them? Eleanor smiled grimly and pulled out another folder. That's where it gets interesting. Every single modification was approved during emergency HOA meetings that most residents never knew about. The meetings were properly noticed according to the letter of the law, but the notices were posted in locations where nobody would see them. She showed us copies of meeting minutes buried in obscure community bulletin boards. Legal notices placed in the classified sections of newspapers nobody read, and email notifications sent to addresses that residents hadn't used in years. It's technically legal, but designed to ensure no one would show up to object. Karen's been running these phantom meetings for 8 years, systematically redistributing property boundaries to benefit herself and a small group of associates, but the real bombshell was still coming. Eleanor pulled out a manila envelope marked confidential and spread its contents across the table: bank statements, wire transfer records, and corporate documents that made my head spin. Karen isn't working alone, Eleanor said quietly. She's partnered with a development company called Summit Properties, LLC. They've been buying up the properties that families like the Johnsons and Martinez were forced to sell, always at below market prices. Diana picked up one of the documents, her expression growing darker. This shows Summit Properties purchased the Henderson property for 60% of its assessed value, then immediately flipped it for full market price to another buyer. Nodded. And if you look at the corporate filings, Summit Properties LLC is owned by a holding company, which is owned by another company, but I managed to trace it back. The ultimate owner is Karen's ex-husband, Richard Blackwood. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. So Karen harasses families until they're desperate to sell, I said slowly. They sell cheap to Summit Properties, which is secretly controlled by her ex-husband, and then the property gets resold at full value. They split the profits. Eleanor's expression was grim. It's worse than that.
Look at this.
She showed us a surveyor's report that made my blood run cold. Remember how Karen was so desperate to get into your house, Marcus? She wasn't looking for HOA violations. She was looking for your father's original architectural plans. Eleanor's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Your father designed this entire neighborhood, and his plans are the only remaining documentation of the true property boundaries. With those plans, someone could prove that every single property modification Karen has made over the past 8 years is fraudulent. Diana was already reaching for her phone. This is evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and possibly RICO violations. We need to contact the FBI immediately. But Eleanor held up a hand. There's more. Yesterday, when I was researching the corporate connections, I discovered something that explains why Karen was so confident about her fake emergency powers. She pulled out another document that made Diana's face go pallid. Rodriguez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. He contacted me 6 months ago. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. The Bureau has been investigating a multi-state real estate fraud ring. Summit Properties isn't just operating here in Oakwood Heights there. Part of a network that's been systematically defrauding homeowners across 17 different communities in 5 states. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The FBI has been building a case. They needed proof of the original property boundaries to demonstrate the fraud, Eleanor continued. Agent Rodriguez asked me to be an informant because of my architectural background and long-term residence. I've been documenting Karen's activities for months, but I never imagined the scope was this large. Diana stood up, her police chief authority taking over. Eleanor, We need to contact Agent Rodriguez immediately. This has moved beyond local jurisdiction. But as she reached for her phone, we heard the sound that made our blood freeze. Car doors slamming outside, followed by heavy footsteps on Eleanor's front porch. Through the window, I could see Karen approaching with two men in expensive suits. And her expression was nothing like the unhinged community activist we'd seen before. This was the face of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and was prepared to do whatever it took to protect their operation. "She knows," Eleanor whispered. Somehow, Karen figured out that we're on to her. The doorbell rang. This time it wasn't the aggressive hammering we'd experienced before. This was the patient. A confident ring of people who were certain they held all the cards. Diana's hand moved instinctively toward her service weapon. As Karen's voice carried through the door, calm and controlled in a way that was far more terrifying than her previous hysteria. "Mrs. Finch, we need to discuss some recent developments regarding your research activities. I think you'll find our conversation very enlightening." The conversation that followed was surreal. Karen sat in Eleanor's living room like she owned the place, flanked by two men who introduced themselves as legal representatives from Summit Properties. She'd completely abandoned her neighborhood, busybody persona, and was now operating with the cold efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "Mrs. Finch, we understand you've been conducting some amateur research into property records," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Unfortunately, some of your methods have violated privacy laws and trespassing statutes." As a taller of the two suits, who called himself Mr. Davidson, pulled out a tablet and began reading from what appeared to be a legal document. "We have evidence of unauthorized access to private property records, harassment of legitimate business operators, and conspiracy to interfere with lawful commercial activities." Diana started to object, but the second man, Mr. Walsh, held up a wool hand. "Chief Thornfield, we're aware of your position. This matter involves federal jurisdiction and interstate commerce violations. We'd prefer to handle this quietly through proper civil channels." It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. Every word carefully chosen to sound official while dancing right up to the line of actual threats. Karen's transformation was complete. Gone was the shrieking HOA president, replaced by someone who clearly understood how to manipulate the legal system. "Elon, dear," she said with fake sweetness, "you've gotten yourself involved in something far beyond your understanding. The best thing for everyone would be to forget about your little research project and return any documents you may have acquired." But Eleanor wasn't backing down. "I know exactly what you're doing, Marlene. You've been systematically defrauding families for years, and now you're trying to intimidate us into silence." Karen's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of genuine fury. "You old fool, do you have any idea who you're dealing with? This operation spans 5 states and involves people with resources you can't imagine." When everything went sideways, Diana's phone rang, and the caller ID showed FBI agent Rodriguez. His voice was tense. "Chief Thornfield, we have a situation. We've just arrested Agent Morrison from our field office for leaking information to targets of our investigation. We have reason to believe your location has been compromised, and you need to evacuate immediately." The two suits exchanged glances, and Karen's confident expression faltered slightly. Mr. Davidson stood up smoothly. "I think we've covered everything we need to discuss today, Mrs. Finch. We trust you'll consider our conversation carefully." But as they moved toward the door, Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through Diana's phone speaker. "Chief, we're tracking multiple vehicles converging on your location. Get out now." Diana was already moving, her police training taking over. "Eleanor, grab your evidence. We're leaving through the back door." But Karen's calm. The facade was cracking. "You don't understand," she shouted as we headed for Eleanor's kitchen. "They don't just want the evidence destroyed, they want you eliminated. I tried to handle this quietly, but you forced their hand." We made it to Eleanor's backyard just as 3 black SUVs pulled up to the front of the house. Diana called for backup while we moved through the neighborhood's interconnected backyards. But Karen's voice followed us with a chilling confession. 20 years I've built this life. 20 years since Richard left me with nothing. You think I chose this? They own me now. And if I don't deliver, They'll kill me too. The next few hours were a blur of safe houses and FBI debriefings. Agent Rodriguez explained that their investigation had been compromised from the beginning. Agent Morrison had been feeding information to the criminal network, warning them about federal interest and helping them stay ahead of the investigation. The operation is much larger than we initially realized, Rodriguez told us in a secure conference room. Summit Properties is just one arm of an organization that's been systematically targeting suburban communities across the country. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. Due to the compromised investigation and the illegal surveillance that the criminal organization had been conducting, all the evidence Eleanor had gathered was now considered inadmissible in court. Worse, Diana was being placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into potential conflicts of interest and procedural violations. The very fact that she was married to someone involved in the case was being used against her. "I don't understand," Diana said, her voice tight with frustration. "We're the victims here. How are we being treated like criminals?" Agent Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "The organization has very good lawyers, and they've managed to turn the legal situation upside down. They're claiming that Mrs. Finch conducted illegal surveillance, that you abused your position as police chief, and that Marcus interfered with lawful business activities." Karen, meanwhile, had vanished. Her house was empty, her phone disconnected, and according to neighbors, she'd left in the middle of the night with several suitcases. For 48 hours, it looked like she'd gotten away with everything. The organization had successfully neutralized the investigation, eliminated the evidence, and made their primary local operator disappear before she could become a liability. But that evening, as Diana and I sat in our living room, feeling defeated and wondering if we'd ever see justice, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Eleanor's number, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. "Mr. Thornfield, this is David Blackwood, Karen's son." His voice was shaking but determined. "I've been working with the FBI for 6 months, providing evidence about my mother's activities. She doesn't know, but I recorded everything, every conversation, every meeting, every confession." The silence stretched between us as the implications sank in. "David, where are you? Are you safe?" He laughed bitterly. "Safe? My mother just tried to kill me, Mr. Thornfield. She found out about my cooperation with the FBI and she completely snapped. She's not the woman you think you know. She's capable of things that would terrify you." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But I have everything, every detail of the operation, every name, every location. And tomorrow, the whole world is going to know the truth." David Blackwood met us at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. His face was a road map of bruises, and his left arm was in a makeshift sling. He looked like he'd aged a decade. In the past week, and when he sat down across from Diana and me, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "You have to understand," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mother isn't the person any of you think she is. She's been living a double life for so long that I'm not sure she even knows who she is anymore." He pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on the table between us. 6 months ago, Agent Rodriguez approached me. They'd been investigating Summit Properties and traced some connections back to my father and mother. I thought, it was a mistake at first, I mean. My mom's crazy about HOA rules and neighborhood drama, but a criminal. It seemed impossible. David's laugh was bitter and hollow. Then, I started paying attention to her phone calls, her late-night meetings, the people who would come to the house when she thought I was asleep. The recordings he played for us were devastating. Karen's voice, crystal clear, discussing property fraud, intimidation tactics, and what she euphemistically called permanent solutions for people who wouldn't cooperate. "The Henderson family is becoming a problem." Her voice crackled through the tiny speaker. "They're asking too many questions about the survey discrepancies. We need to accelerate their timeline." Another voice, older and more gravelly, responded. "How accelerated are we talking? Financial pressure or something more direct?" "That's Vincent Caruso," David explained, pausing the recording. "He runs the entire Eastern Seaboard operation. Summit Properties is just one of dozens of shell companies they use. They've been systematically targeting suburban communities for over 15 years, using local operatives like my mother to identify vulnerable properties and pressure families into selling." Diana leaned forward, her cop instincts fully engaged. Despite her suspension, David, these recordings could put dozens of people in federal prison. Why haven't you turned them over to the FBI already? David's expression darkened. Because 3 days ago I discovered that Agent Morrison wasn't the only FBI informant working for Caruso's organization. Or someone higher up. Someone with access to witness protection protocols and safe house locations. When I told Agent Rodriguez about my suspicions, he went pale and told me to disappear until he could verify the leak. He ran his uninjured hand through his hair. That night, my mother came home with Vincent and 2 other men. They weren't there to talk. The story David told us was chilling. Karen had discovered his cooperation with the FBI through the FBI. Corrupted channels within the Bureau itself. Her reaction wasn't maternal disappointment or even anger. It was cold, calculated fury. She looked at me like I was a stranger, David said quietly, like I was just another obstacle too. Be removed. That's when I realized that whatever she'd become over the years, there wasn't any trace left of the woman who used to read me bedtime stories. The attack had been swift and brutal. Vincent's men had held David while Karen methodically went through his room, searching for recording equipment and evidence. She found my backup drives, David continued. But what she didn't know is that I'd been uploading everything to a secure cloud server that Agent Rodriguez set up. Every conversation, every meeting, every confession, it's all there. Time-stamped and GPS tagged. But Karen's transformation went deeper than anyone had realized. David played another recording, this one from just 2 days earlier. Karen's voice was different now, stripped of any pretense of neighborhood concern or community leadership. Vincent, the FBI knows about the 17 communities. They have maps, financial records, everything. We need to implement the scorched Earth protocol. Vincent's response was immediate. How many witnesses are we talking about? Karen's answer made my blood freeze. 7 primary targets, including my son, the old woman, the police chief, her husband, and the 3 families who've been feeding information to the feds. Diana's face had gone white. David, are you saying they're planning to kill all the witnesses? David nodded grimly. Tonight Vincent brought in a crew from out of state. They're professionals and they're going to make it look like a series of random break-ins gone wrong. My mother gave them addresses, schedules, security codes, everything they need. He looked directly at me. Mr. Thornfield, they know Diana's been suspended and stripped of her weapon. They know Eleanor lives alone. They think you're all sitting ducks. But David had one more revelation that changed everything. There's something else, he said, pulling out a thick manila envelope. While they were beating me, trying to get me to reveal where I'd hidden the evidence, my mother started ranting about why she'd gotten involved with Caruso's people in the first place. He opened the envelope and spread out documents that made Diana gasp. She didn't just marry my father. Richard Shee killed him. The death certificate listed Richard Blackwood's cause of death as accidental drowning. But the documents David had uncovered told a different story: insurance policies taken out months before his death. Life insurance policies that Karen had fought to collect despite their pending divorce. Most damning of all, a recording of Karen confessing to Vincent about how she'd handled the Richard problem years earlier. She drugged him and pushed him into the lake, David said flatly. She discovered that he was planning to expose the property fraud scheme to federal authorities, so she eliminated him and made it look like an accident. That's when Vincent's people recruited her fully. They had evidence of the murder, so she couldn't refuse their demands. David's voice cracked. I've been living with my father's killer for 10 years, thinking she was just an obsessive perfectionist. As David finished his story, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Marcus, this is Eleanor. They cut my power and phone lines. I can see men surrounding my house. If you get this message, don't come home. There, waiting for you too. Diana was already moving, reaching for her backup weapon despite her suspension. We need to call Agent Rodriguez immediately, she said. But David shook his head. Rodriguez is dead. I killed him. This